Today is November 7th. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki, Naganago, Mekoche, Chase Tukom Aki. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. Native Calgarian is being recorded on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed U.S. Canadian border are the Blackfeet. North of the border are the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22nd, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Wesley, Chiniki, and Bearspaw nations of the Stoney Nations, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina Nation. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit status and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with government signing on your behalf. I honor the Blackfoot as the elders and members have been so kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name. I was born in Calgary, or Blackfoot McKinstis, as Michelle Elliott, another English name, which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. My father is a Canadian, and I'm a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution, while having an Indian Act imposed status card. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Hare people, not hare as in rabbits. And we were called the Hare people because we always showed up in Arctic hare fur, and yeah, that's why. So anyway, we're also called the Great Bear Lake people in Treaty 11. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene Nation is a visitor to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe, meaning many horse town, named after the Calgary Stampede. And I am now officially moved to Lethbridge, which is still in Blackfoot territory, and yeah, it's the hills of darkness of coal. So it's kind of interesting. I got to learn how to say that. Anyway, land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as the guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. Any mistakes or misinterpretations will be on me. I encourage questions so that misunderstandings can be cleared up as soon as possible. I do not speak on behalf of all Indigenous. I just share what I know as I walk down the red road. My native Calgarian Patreon account is where you can pledge and support. Thank you to my previous donors for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd just love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. Also, giving a review helps, whichever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. You can also go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. So today I have a returning guest. I have my friend here, Shelley. Shelley, I'm so glad that you could join me today.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here as well. I I it's I met you in 2016, but that was only at a brief event, and then for a year we've been working on a lot of things. So I will introduce myself. I am a settler of um, 14 generations on Turtle Island. So on one side, so I know that my history has done colonial harm, and I have acknowledged this. I um, have worked through this within the book clubs and with Michelle that we can't. I understand being guilty for the past doesn't help the future, but doing better now and for the future generations, like my niece and nephew, will help move forward in the path of reconciliation. I am also an autistic female, and I have to come on to pack that. I'm trying not to mask. I don't look autistic, so I'm trying to break that stereotype that I have a master's degree in disability and community studies. I um, I have a full-time job that I've been there for over 5.5 years, almost a 15-year relationship, and I do activism on the side within the disability field and uh, in the Reconciliation Action Group.
Yes, and you've been a really great ally in so many ways. And last week I had Shane Baker on, who is Indigenous and does have a disability. And I really thought you and I talking more about the disability like world and what does Indigenous disability look like from your perspective, as well as so many other things to unpack in that. I was just talking to one of my elders, and we were talking about a native who has mental health issues, trying to get them housing and such. And um, I'm new to Lethbridge, so this person happens to be female. So we were googling the YWCA and seeing if the YWCA Lethbridge has some different things for this non-native, and it's really ironic that you have two native women looking up for non-native, but that's the series of the healthcare status that we have. And by chance, this elder, she had also ran against Ralph Klein a million years ago, and I ran against Jason Kenney, and like we are trying to come up with the solutions and trying to talk about these issues, but as you know, Indigenous voices have been erased so well, let alone, the conversation about disabilities in general. So I just really appreciate you being on my show to talk about this month specifically, because as you were saying, you're like, how come nobody knows it's Indigenous Disabilities Month? I'm like, I think I know the answer, and I think you know the answer. So it might be a good podcast to unpack that a bit. So I really appreciate you coming on to talk about some of the things you wanted to share.
I really, because I know that I'm a white cis female and I have privileges. I, being a bigger lady, that's one privilege that I can't hide. The size isn't like, our society's fat phobic. I just can't get
Yes.
around that. Uh, like,
Yes, and I hate that because it's actually been Indigenous women that have helped me really unpack a lot of that.
hmm,
But when it comes to, there's something called pretty privilege too.
yes,
And like you and I both have really pretty eyes, and I
yeah,
think that gets us into circles differently than people who don't.
mhm,
So our world is so wild, isn't it?
yeah. And it's, and the intersectionality by Kimberly Crenshaw, I always give her credit because I feel that, and it's been studied that Black women and Indigenous women and marginalized women don't get enough credit. Um, so whenever I bring up intersectionality, I make sure that I bring up who wrote it or who coined it.
Sure.
Because I don't like speaking for people, but at the tables that I am at, I will be like, "What about this?" Um, I um, when I listen to a lot of podcasts, yours included, and I make sure that a lot of them are disability related and of racialized disability or relation or racialized, and I support them because that is very important to support creators of these that are speaking the truths. Um, like yeah, sorry, I get very anxious. And what else is that people who are racialized and um, have disabilities are have so many intersectionality. So they have the class because most people like who are say in Alberta who are on AISH live below the poverty line, and unless you're on supportive housing, have family, have access to a low income bus pass, that's it. Then you can make AISH work, kinda.
Mhm.
Um, but if you're in a small town like Medicine Hat or Lethbridge, I don't know about their transportation system. It doesn't like it's not a lot of money, and um, and then because having a disability um, means you spend more on everything. Uh, yeah, because like a lot of individuals with disabilities have different sensitivities to food, and so their diets are different, so they have to spend more on food, and the cheaper food is not good for you. Um,
No, and medication and
yeah,
aids.
yeah,
I'm just learning about these CPAC machines for sleeping.
Mhm.
And like this is, I don't know, I thought it was standard stuff for older people, but it actually isn't. It's just for me
Yeah.
and my family. Anyway, that bigger picture is that like these are really expensive devices.
Mhm.
And I had a friend of mine who was a vet, and he just gave us one of his because
Mhm.
as he said, he got duped by some aggressive salesperson into basically getting a CPAC machine that he didn't need. And I was just gobsmacked that anybody would take advantage of a vet, of somebody with a disability. But at the same time, it's like, Michelle, like seriously, you've lived 44 years on this planet. You don't know this yet. And it's like, yes, I know this. I just, I don't know what it is even about me where it's like, even after all this time, after all of the awful stuff I've seen people do, some jerk off gets commissioned by basically taking advantage of the most vulnerable people in our society. And I know in Canada we're all cool with it because I've seen it example after example. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot to unpack there about what it's like to have a disability and you know intersectionalities of these different components of it. And I'm saying this as a white Indigenous person. There are Black Indigenous people. There are full blood Indigenous people. There's so many things to unpack there. How many people are still judge women or I guess Indigenous people in general as, wait, are you native? You don't look native. And it's like, well, you know that there are different natives than just stereotype you were fed from Hollywood that usually
Yeah.
is like a black face. So that's not okay. Like we're still there. We're still there.
Yeah. And individuals like that exactly. With just going back to the CPAP, they were talking about one insurance company did this because see if you have a CPAP, it's important like from even from mild to moderate to severe, like just to for help for your health. To from what I understand, I'm not no expert, but to have it to help you sleep and for the health conditions.
Yeah.
What insurance started it? You had to for them to insure because I'm on a CPAP to insure to get insured for CPAP supplies and CPAP, you now have to have moderate to severe, not mild to moderate. So they're cracking down on that because one insurance started it, now they all did it, and
Holy.
and now there's a huge recall of CPAP machines by Philips, or is it Rest? No, I think it's Philips. It's not very public, but it's and
It's real. I know. Actually, this gift that was given to us that was I was told by my person who's giving me mine that
mhm,
there was a big recall, and I of course didn't know, so I posted it as soon as I knew. And then this one that was gifted to us, it falls under a lot of the recall stuff. So I'm going to be working with them to try to get the proper pieces all together and then go from there. And then, like my auntie said, you should have a backup. My auntie has one of these machines that help you sleep, and
yeah,
she has a backup. So, yeah, so that's where we're at. And so I'm waiting for approval for my machine, and then we'll have this backup one as well, and just in case. So, but obviously with the correct components, I don't want to be, cancer causing, breathing and using that in any capacity. So,
no, and it's
yeah.
it's the whole machine. It's not just one component because it's the gases and the foam breakdown. But yeah. And then about people say, well, you don't look autistic, and well, what does autism look like? And what you're talking about is with the indigenous too is we're not a monolith. Like I'm not indigenous, but like disability or any racialized group is not a monolith. But they, but when say, but what I'm trying to say is when say a white male shooter goes and does what they speak about him as an individual, but any racialized other person, he gets lumped in a group. It's like all the black men. Well, no, it's that one person, but the way they talk about it, it's all. But when it's a white man, it's that one person, which is not fair.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Agreed.
and I know I don't I read so much about anti oppression, like the Black Lives Matter literature, and Indigenous and a lot of memoirs. I don't know where I heard this, but 50% of Black men that have been shot in the States have some sort of disability. That's not public, and they won't report on that,
Mhm.
and that's just sad.
Well, actually, there's a really great quote about, who are the most, how you treat your most vulnerable populations is like really a reflection of your society. And I think that's such a great thing to be talking about how, how instead of dealing with mental health in a positive, respectful way, we just shoot and kill people. And especially if they're not white. And to me, that's a disgusting form of like eugenics, really. And it's shocking to me. Everybody seems just to be okay with it. And, I think Canadians especially kind of grow up with this idea that, oh, we take care of folks with disabilities, but we actually don't. And here in Alberta, like I remember very specifically when Ralph Klein made the choices that he did to basically kick out people with mental health disabilities. And, everyone was really cool with it. And then there's this big increase in crime. And it's like, well, what did you expect when, people in poverty who are, not given jobs, who are not hired as, and can maintain a position, we don't have allowances for folks with disabilities. We don't accommodate their needs in any capacity. So,
I agree with you, and when because I work in disability, I live in disability. It doesn't shut off at 5 o'clock. So my sister's developmentally delayed. I didn't know I had disabilities until I was 19. I wasn't properly identified as autistic until I was 38. So I started unpacking that when I was 38. I've been autistic since I was a kid, but that's how little they know about autism in females. Because, oh, she's just quiet. She's just likes to be by herself. And they just missed it. And I have learned a lot of workarounds on how to work work really diligently and um, that way. I find why I'm so passionate about disability and the Indigenous rights is because they're really intertwined. Because, as you said, how you treat your most vulnerable uh, individuals in society um, is a reflection. And the fact that disabilities, people, especially anything with the brain, um, is very stigmatized and
yes,
stereotyped.
yes.
And if you're a white man in a wheelchair, it's like there's nothing wrong. But you say you're autistic or you have anxiety or depression or bipolar, oh God, like it's another thing.
It's
So
interesting you should say that because it was just recently ADHD month
mhm,
or Awareness
yeah,
Week. And, we were reading through it, and everyone I know has some form of ADHD that is open about it. All have said that they also weren't diagnosed until they were older. And even my husband and I were talking about the stigma that still comes with having any sort of anxiety, ADHD,
mhm,
mental health type diagnosis. And the irony is we're supposed to be getting help for folks with these conditions, but we don't. Kind of like you were suggesting, insurance companies have it all figured out so that they don't have to really fund these things, and they don't. And who has insurance for these things? Like, we have another myth in Canada about universal health care. So of course that gives us this idea that we somehow take care of our most vulnerable when in fact we do not. And this is just another example of it.
yeah. And my parents just wanted. This is just when my sister got on AISH, and she didn't have much money. Like all her money is from AISH. They wanted a insurance policy. She's healthier than I am, but because she has a disability or developmental delay, and she's on PDD, so her IQ is under 70, and she's hearing impaired, she was denied insurance just for a funeral. My parents wanted to ensure she had a funeral, not some payout, just term insurance for 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 yeah. It was And I tried to get coverage when I wasn't working. This is many years ago, and I wasn't common law on my husband's plan back then, and I was denied in a day because of pre-existing mental health conditions.
Yeah.
And it's yeah.
So, like, that has to end immediately. Like,
Hmm.
we can't, how is that not a discrimination against folks with disabilities? Like,
Yeah.
how has that not been tried under our own human rights principles? Like, clearly that is a violation. And I
Yeah.
mean, again, this is coming from the country where we have to have Jordan's principle for Indigenous people because of this
Yeah.
exact problem. It's like,
Exactly.
well, nobody wants to cover mental health issues, but like, legitimately, are you in healthcare to care about people, or are you in there for, profits on insurance company margins? And it's very clear to me that that is more what, our so-called healthcare system is based upon at this point.
Exactly. And when I talk about racism, I say white people are just waking up to racism. I don't mean like racism broadly. I'm like talking about environmental racism and medical racism. If you bring that up to the average white person, they would not know what you're talking about. But these terms have been, and these concepts have been researched for a long time. If they're just waking up to the general racism and microaggressions, they will be shocked at ableism and how prevalent and how ingrained it is in our society. I had somebody told me, "Oh, I don't think you're disabled, Shelley." I'm like, yeah, I think I have the papers to prove it."
I'm sorry. And I say that because I know exactly what it's like to be that person thinking I know best. Thinking but again, being in a culture of stigma and not wanting that for people that we care about. And it's like, but that's exactly the problem. Like, we can't, if I was diagnosed with a broken knee in some capacity, we would give it surgery, we would move forward. But when it comes to mental health, when it comes to brain disabilities, when it comes to anything to do with emotions, even women's health in general, like,
Yeah.
we just have this taboo about it. And I like it. It's ironic because I know, again, people come to Canada thinking it's the land of milk and honey, but the truth is it's not. And God forbid you have any sort of trauma, and you have absolutely no resources in this country because it's still all Christian based, and which is not trauma informed and not accommodating to folks with trauma. And it doesn't matter who it is, whether you're white or brown or black. Like, there's no allowances, and worse, stigma and denial of insurance. And the fact is, we still rely so much on insurance. I mean, if my husband didn't have insurance through his work plan, you know, if we had to, if my daughter and I had to depend specifically on Indian affairs, we wouldn't be getting any health care at all. And in fact, my daughter is still considered non-status for now, because you have to go through all these hoops in order to get
Hmm.
your status. And ironically, it was somebody else who went through all of those hoops to create S3 to allow my daughter to possibly get their status. And it's hard because my husband and her are getting excited at the idea of having status, which I've had to unpack for 10 years. And I'm still not comfortable with the idea of her getting status because I know what it's like to be discriminated against because your status. But she's going to be discriminated against no matter what anyway, and I have to just get over that. And at least she has a better idea of what that means than what I did. When I got my status, I just assumed that meant going up to the UFC, saying, no, I'm status, and being able to walk in and do my post-secondary education. And I was an idiot. I mean that. Oh, look at, I'm talking about disability and I used an ableist term. Like, I am that able-bodied person that has always tried to, recognize I'm using problematic language. I'm trying to use the terminology wild instead of crazy
Hmm.
because, I was brought up, it's okay to use the word crazy. And of course, that's very dehumanizing for folks who have disabilities, and but also folks who have disabilities that aren't even being properly recognized and not getting proper care because of the stigma that's attached to it in our stupid society, that people actually think we take care of folks with disabilities when we don't.
And this is, and that's why I'm very open about being autistic, because the stigma is that all autism, or like even with Sheldon and on Big Bang Theory and the new show and oh, what is the other one? They'll come to me. I have a very bad memory. Um, the Good Doctor. Sheldon never evolved. He stayed constant, and he's not a true representative of an autistic person.
Mm.
Um, and with the Good Doctor, they've arced him a little. He's growing, but he's still not a true representative. Like, we're an anxious bunch. Like, and a lot of people think that it's a little boy who plays with trains is an autistic person. And there's a big stigma that there's autism with or without a developmental delay, and there's two separate diagnoses. And I've talked to parents that don't know the difference, and uh, there's a big difference because uh, the the autistic diagnosis has nothing to do with IQ, and you tends to be a higher IQ with just autism for them, or normal IQ, and then with the delays when you have the developmental delay.
Mm.
So when you say you're autistic, because it'd be very insulting to me to say that I have a developmental delay. I don't. I'm very functional. Um, but I don't want to discriminate against people with developmental disabilities because I know how hard it is. I'm private guardian and trustee of my sister, and I try to make sure that she's very happy. And if she wants to spend $100 on yarn, well, she can spend $100 on yarn to make her happy. So
Well, but that there is a conversation there to have about the idea of quality of health. Like,
yeah,
why are folks with any sort of disability denied quality of health, quality of
yeah,
life, spirit,
yeah,
happiness? Like, and that's a whole other conversation. But I'm glad you mentioned it because it's
yeah,
important to say, like, we have to quit dehumanizing folks and
mhm,
remember that they have joys, they have dreams, they have, vacations. Like,
yeah,
and if vacations are normalized, why are they not for everybody?
exactly. And accessibility for people with disabilities means accessibility for all. Curb cuts were a huge thing back in the day, but people that use strollers, that use trolleys for package delivery or water jug are very happy to have them because curb cuts are an accessible thing. If you didn't have elevators, well, who wants to walk to the fifth floor? Not me.
Honestly, Shelley, when
Yeah,
I ran for municipal politics, it
yeah,
really bothered me that for my daughter, I needed this huge chariot wheels in order to navigate around because
mhm,
it was just so inaccessible, just the sidewalks. And like
mhm,
in my area that I was in, we only had sidewalks on one side of the road, not both sides. And that's quite common in
mhm,
Calgary urban development because
yeah,
it's cheaper. And like we don't question these things when we should be questioning these things. Like, and if I, as an able-bodied mom, was having problems getting around, and there weren't very many path systems for me or my, my dogs, my daughter, when I was, when they're little, you try to get them outside and walk them around a bit, and
yeah,
there just wasn't that infrastructure in place. And I was in a really well-established community that had been established since the early 80s, and there wasn't infrastructure. And well, in my area didn't have very much representation in general. So anyway, there was a lot to unpack there, but it was shocking to me.
yeah,
um, all of the playgrounds in our area provincially, that was part of the reason why I wanted to run, because they were expired. So all of the playgrounds, like, they have that lifespan and they were
yeah.
expiring, but none of them were accessible for folks with disabilities.
And it's like I catch myself, like I still have ableist terms and I will text myself saying crazy or
Sure.
stupid, or like I'm trying to catch myself, and even when I'm writing, I I'm trying not to use functional levels like high functioning and low functioning because you're putting function on people. Where I try to use high support needs and low support needs because it's a fluid. Uh,
Oh, I really appreciate that. I hope not just myself, but all of our listeners like hear what you just said, because I do think I see people using the terminology high functioning, low functioning, and higher support versus lower support is such a better way to put that. So I really
mhm.
appreciate that teaching.
And I even seen somebody say high and low support needs or even ableist, but I'm like, it's not what I feel being in this, like I've had 20 years paid work in the field and I've lived it since I was 5. Well, since I was born, but around since I was 5, is that you just have to, it's not so much the language. The language, I'm very sensitive to language, but it's also how we treat each other. If we treat each other like crap, the language isn't going to matter. We have to treat each other better.
Sure.
And Torben Noah said a problem like the R word is still being used, and I can't stand hearing that word. And then it was the short bus, and then he was talking about DD. Well, what is DD? Developmental delayed. So they just keep changing it, but it's the attitude towards people with disability, especially developmental delays, is I don't like the word developmental delay. I think they need to come up with something because developmental delay maybe leave hope to the family that they may catch up. But because my other sister, I have 2 sisters, thought my other sister might catch up. It's like, no, she's never going to catch up. But that's because it's not taught in schools about disability unless you have somebody disabled in your class. And we're like, language is so finicky. Like, if somebody says I suffer, I hate that. Like, you don't say suffer from unless it's like suffer from trauma or suffer from pain. And that's very subjective. It's very like, I can't, like, if it's like torture, yes, you're suffering from torture, but you're putting a judgment on somebody else. Let that person say that they're suffering, but to say they're suffering from a disability, that's not on you to make. It's on them to say, because they may not be. That's how you view it.
No, that's such a great point. I think I use that terminology quite frequently. I mean, I'm trying really hard when it comes to unpacking things to like words have a lot of power, and I say things I don't love. Um, that's for sure. So I just really appreciate that. And I think, I hope not just myself, but I hope other people are reflecting on what you're saying, projecting what your assumptions are onto other people with terminology like suffer. And it's just great teachings.
And like even medical professions, like the quality of life. Because I've been listening to some around COVID, I've been listening to some podcasts that in the States, I they were going to. It didn't happen, but they were fighting this policy or law that if somebody with a disability had, I may not get all the facts right, so but this is the general terms that if
Concept.
somebody, yeah, if they had if they were disabled and a uh, they had a ventilator and somebody needed a ventilator and was going to live or they had better quality of life according to these factors, they would take the disabled person off the ventilator and give it to them. Now, it didn't actually happen to my knowledge, but they were fighting it in the States.
Oh,
I
that's eugenics.
Yeah, and there is a lot of eugenics around disability that we're still fighting. Like Autism Speaks. I don't. Sorry, I'll go back. I jump around a lot.
Sure.
They were fighting it. I was on Disability Visibility podcast with Alice Wong. She was talking about bioethics. Um, with it came up on a few podcasts of hers
Sure.
about how the quality of life is actually very subjective, and you can't do that with people with disabilities. It's different standards. Because my quality of life on paper may look very different. And so yeah, they were talking about that they were actually fought it. Some states rescinded. I didn't have enough time to look into the full details, but that was actually a policy.
Wow.
And
Um, yeah, so Interesting that when U.S., Canada, the Western allies had invaded Germany, there
Mhm.
was something called Operation Paperclip in the States, and there was a similar operation here in Canada. I can't remember it offhand, but it was basically taking the German scientists and bringing them here for their brilliance. And it's just been reflected in so many of our policies in medical field, and it creates such harm. But it's also harmful in our terminology that we use and our society. It's so prevalent, so pervasive.
That's why Asperger's is I don't know if that's why it was taken out of DSM, but that's why it's fallen out of use is because Hans Asperger's was in the Third Reich in Germany, and he basically got to choose who to who got to live and die. So, um, yeah, he was part. It's so I just know he was in the Third Reich. I There's so much in disability to dive into everything, to know every single fact is I just know he had something to do with the Third Reich, and it's all on the internet. I It's just there's so much to learn. And then there with autism and ABA therapy, it's the same people, the same person or same group of people that came up with a conversion practice. I agree with you, it's not therapy, and people are still fighting for ABA. So if they came up with conversion practice, why would ABA be any better? And they're talking, it's on research that ABA is like dog training for children.
We were watching Deadpool, and the whole X-Men concept. The Marvel universe has that
Yeah,
idea of like, kind of just along what you were saying. It's still like the bad guy is still um, religious based, Christian based, and
yeah,
still, doing this type of so-called
yeah,
therapy when it's so painfully not therapy. And it was just interesting because I'm literally trying to watch. I watch fantasy and all of
yeah,
like intergalactic stuff to not think about politics in our life. And it's like
yeah,
even watching the X-Men, you're like, reminded of the conversion therapy and the craptastic ways that we have like influenced religion into our so-called mental health strategies. And
yeah.
it's so gross.
I agree. And then we got like organizations that like Autism Speaks is the biggest in the States, and it has influence on some organizations in Canada. I can't speak to which one it is. Anyone that uses the puzzle piece, um, they
Mm,
want to cure autism, and I don't need a cure. I'm fine. Um, I think different. I do things different. Yes, I have a disability, um, but I think different, and I come up with things differently. So I don't need to be cured. We do not need to be cured.
no,
So
the opposite. We need to appreciate your perspective, your thinking, your ways of processing. And
yeah.
like that's the ironic part. And I'm going to give like full disclosure. When I first had my daughter, that was when they were first talking about autism. I read all of Jenny McCarthy's books. I have
Hmm.
them actually. I think
Yeah.
I just got rid of like belly laughs and baby laughs because it was really great for when you first have a child if you're a
Hmm.
reader anyway. And of course, I read all of her stuff about autism and
Yeah.
all these things that are related. So I had a lot of unpacking to do when it came to autism because we were still in a very fear driven, um, as moms.
Hmm.
You can prevent autism, and it's like, well, then if I can prevent autism, I want to. But it wasn't until I was a little older and understood that like this isn't something that you get to choose. This isn't
No.
it's something that, by not giving baby formula, your kid doesn't get to have autism. It's like it's not that simple. But at the time when you're a new mom, that was very influential. So, that just full disclosure, that's
Yeah.
I'm unpacking that too.
And I was going to school for the start of the disability studies stuff because I have the disability studies diploma, community rehab bachelor, and disability studies master's. I was in the beginning. I The reason why I didn't go into social work, kind of funny, is I was having a what I thought was a mental health breakdown, but it was actual autism burnout because of my grandma was passing, and I did the big transition from from high school to post secondary. So
Sure.
The reason why I didn't go into social work was it had a 50-hour volunteer window, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. But I had the 50 hours. I wasn't doing well. So I was working with Between Friends clubs with my sister at camp. Like, well, she was going to that camp, but I was volunteering there.
Cool.
But I'm glad because it allows me to think as more of a capacity building uh, rather than because I see what the child welfare system has done, which is another part of the genocide of um, the Indigenous people, as well as the family. It's got a lot of issues with families with disabilities as well.
God, yes.
So the child welfare system needs to be reformed. I don't know how. I don't know how. I don't have those answers.
I really and truly like I don't know if you know of Velvet Martin. She's an activist in Edmonton.
No.
She created something called Samantha's Law. So
Yes.
Samantha was her child who had a disability, and at that time, the way the colonial laws were set up for colonial belief systems was that
Yeah.
if your child had a disability, it automatically went into foster care system with the assumption it would get every single thing, service, medical needs done as possible. But at a certain point, you know, people started to question that. And Velvet Martin, the mother of Samantha Martin, not just questioned it, but said, this is wrong. Why are you not giving parents the resources? And
Exactly.
Samantha, unfortunately, when she was in the system, deteriorated, and they gave her back to Velvet when she was dying, and she died. So Velvet worked really hard to create what was called Samantha's Law, and that was giving access to anything to parents rather than having to force them to give it up. But sadly, that is still the reality in all of the other provinces. So Velvet wanted to do that work nationally, but
Hmm.
she was only able to get it done only in Alberta. And I always thought, so that means in every single province in the rest of the freaking country,
Hmm.
this is still common practice, and it's disgusting.
And we have there's everybody wants to do accessibility, but it's cheaper to when you sorry that and that's off topic. Yes, I agree. Like we need to work together, and this is why with all marginalized groups, we can't if we just work together, we're not in a monolith. But if we work together, we have a lot of the similar we have a lot of the
Struggles.
struggles.
Yeah.
If we work together, we could get so much more done. I was in a meeting and I was like, "Okay, disability is one of the only ones. I, somebody said you could join the LGBTQ2+ S group. I don't know how, but that's not I don't belong to that group, so I still have to figure out how you can join it when maybe it's unpacking that because you've been repressed and then being your true identity, you can join that one. But I I'll be ignorant. I don't understand that. Um, I will say that. But disability, you can join any point in your life. You can be temporary or it can be permanent. And as you age, you will most likely join that community. So being the biggest minority, I'm like in this meeting I was at, let's work together to be a bigger voice. And everybody was kind of on board. This one person is like, well, we need more representation from this. I'm like, okay, but why don't we work together? Because if we all try to fight, we're not going to get anywhere. I think that's when I texted you a few days ago that with the talks, I think the climate change, that all the Indigenous groups they talked about how they were working together. It was all about women, and it was in a positive light. It was so nice to see. It was or to hear that they're actually talking about Indigenous women in a positive light. They centered on Canadian Indigenous women about the environment and how they're fighting. It was really nice to see. Because we know that disabilities and Indigenous women in the media usually tend not to be positive stories. Because we even in the disability where I have a Stella Young coined it. She has a TED talk called "I'm Not Your Inspiration." Coined it inspiration porn, It's for people who are able-bodied, like, as a person of a disability, saying the only disability is a bad attitude or something like that, or some guy taking a child with Down syndrome or a teenager with Down syndrome to the prom. Like, that's an inspiration porn to make people that aren't disabled feel better about themselves.
Oh,
That's why it's called inspiration porn.
we do trauma porn or Canada does trauma porn against Indigenous people, against all marginalized people for that matter. And so I know how gross that feels already. Just you saying it, I'm like, yep, that's Canada. We just totally exploit something to make able-bodied, straight, cis people, white, feel amazing, like things are okay. And a great example, propaganda, where you have police who are like, oh my God, look at, I'm going to give ice cream to this marginalized demographic to make me look so good. Like it's just, we do this so naturally in this country and it's so gross. And yet we think we're the freaking heroes. And I mean, I'm saying that because damn well I'm a liberal, and in liberal, progressive liberal circles, like this is like literally the air they breathe on.
Yeah.
We're going to donate to this underprivileged country that we actually exploited, and our country in Britain actually, created this problem 200 years ago, but we're going to give food now, or we're going to give climate change money, yay, because we're such heroes. But really, that is exploitation.
Yeah.
And we do it in an inspirational way. So everything you just said makes total sense. And I hate that we do it.
It's like CTV News, or one of the news, I think it's CTV, I can't remember.
Sure.
They keep talking about the gentleman from the Humboldt Broncos crash. Okay, that's fine. It was a very tragic bus crash.
Yep.
That's fine.
Yeah.
However, it bugs me that they keep showing his progress, that he went to Asia to get some experimental treatments, try to walk again. Like, they're trying to show that you can just overcome disability, like if you have enough money. Like, it bugs me every time it comes on. It's like, disability is not a bad word, disability is not a dirty word. Like,
well, and then it's the other part is that like everybody in this country knows that hockey players are now an elite group with parents who have a hell of a lot of money. And it is so exclusionary and it's so toxic. And I mean, decade after decade, we have examples of it, whether it's Eric Lindros, whether it's Graham James, whether it's now we have this issue going on again. And it's like, when are people going to get, like, we're talking about the most upper class part of Canadians play hockey. And now, of course, if they were that, rich enough to put their kids through professional elite sports, of course they can afford to take them to other fucking countries to get these, experimental ideas that the rest of us would have no like hope of ever achieving, because most of us don't even have vacations. I mean, anyone who listens to my stupid podcast knows that. I'm no position to be doing these types of things, and all of those liberal conventions that I've been able to go to, like that's based off of fundraising and donations. It's not based off of like all of the money that I have. It's incredible to me, like how people, like I know people who vacation twice a year, once in the winter and once in the summer, and hats off to them that they can afford to, but like there's such a disparity. So for somebody like, and I was literally talking to a young about a young woman who she's not that young, but ultimately she was disowned by her family. They knowingly, with a young girl, put her on the streets. They knowingly, she has some type of disability that's never been properly diagnosed. I don't understand this society. Is it's so-called pro-life, but the moment they're here, there's no obligation to them.
It's pro-birth. They want the baby as
Yeah.
soon, because if you say, they're like, I don't want abortion. Okay, well, let's raise your taxes, because uh, the child needs to be taken care of. Oh, I don't, because like they need to have clothing, they need to have school, they need to have healthcare. Oh, well, you can't raise my taxes. Well, then who's going to look after the child because the mom can't, because they work um they have minimum wage job, they work 40 hours, but they can't afford to live in this city or in this country, in the States either. So they're just pro birth. They are not pro child
Oh, I know,
because
and it
yeah.
makes me so upset that
Mhm.
I'm livid this week, especially out of any weeks, because Elon Musk said, "Well, World Health Organization, if you can give me a business plan of why, if I invest X amount of billions of dollars that we can feed the world, then I'll consider it." And I'm like, first of all, start paying living wages,
Mhm.
so shut the hell up. Like I don't even know where to start with how gross that was, that he had the audacity. Like, we were seriously thinking, okay, well, the next thing is everybody needs to have a Tesla. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I think at this point now we will never have a vehicle as opposed to buying a Tesla, because that was so gross. I mean, he's gross at so many levels, but this
Oh
was
yeah.
like the ultimate of it. It's like, so now we have to show you the business plan because you refuse to pay your taxes, because you refuse to pay living wages. Like, come on. Oh,
Um,
you're
yeah, I think Elon Musk is Caitlyn Jenner to the autistics. He does not represent us. He he's a privileged, he needs to pay his taxes, he needs to yeah, he needs to shut up.
Oh my god, he just drove me mental. And that was actually like it's a new realization that he actually does have autism. I actually forgot about that. To me, he's still just a rich white guy that is so privileged. He just walks around like, well, you show me how to solve
Mhm,
world, like, clearly unaware of what colonialism is, because we're just
mhm.
going to launch into space and take over another planet, because colonialism is like is something he lives and breathes and doesn't and is yet completely aware of, just like his white privilege. Holy.
Yeah, and like yeah, he, he may be autistic, but he does not represent us. And there is a big divide in the autistic community, like between um, the autistic adults and parents with children that have autism, because some parents don't want to listen to us adults and explain like just what's going on. But there's divides in all communities, and language is a big issue with disabilities because it's like other person first, or I hate when I hear special needs or special abilities. Just call it disabilities or disabled. It's not dirty word. Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't have special abilities. Sorry, that's my little rant.
No, no.
And I know on your podcast you've talked about defund the police. I know that's such a trigger word. It's not defund the police. It's redistribute their budget for pre-prevention programs to like pre-programs that uh, I was the root cause, like help with mental health, help with poverty, help have stable housing for individuals that are houseless. Because I was watching Trevor Noah, the Daily Show. Or no, it was John Oliver. Sorry, I watched both of them. But he was saying like if you just give them housing and then do everything else, stuff helps. It's more cheaper to help people in homes and then do the addictions program, then do this. It costs a lot less money to put individuals into houses than to work with the justice system, the healthcare system. So look at housing, look at rent subsidies, and just redistribute. We don't need cops with a tank. And I know Calgary doesn't, but like in the
We
States.
do actually.
Oh, we do? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I, some stuff I can't keep up with everything. Um, but like, we don't need a tank. We need better prevention programs for youth. We need more funding for mental health. More like, why are cops going to wellness checks? If they're going to wellness checks, they should have not be the first person at the door, but should maybe a social worker and hang back because that could be a very big trigger. Um, and then mm, like I don't know the statistic, but a lot of people in our prison systems, our remand, have mental health issues. So why are jails the new mental health system? That makes no sense to me. So I think redistributing our and taking things off their plate and putting it back on health and putting it back in the social service industry, that needs reform too. I think working in this system, I find that so many people need learn ableism, learn what is ableism, and if you're just in social service for a paycheck, you need to leave. That's I know that's harsh, but um,
I
there's
gotta
other
tell you
jobs that
though, like we had a friend, a family friend, and he was a social worker, and he seen, the worst of the worst, where
mhm,
social workers force single moms to sleep with them in order to keep their kids, and he couldn't. After a month, was like, I can't watch this. There's no accountability. They have more rights than the police do, and we already know the police are above the law. It is like it's one of those industries that if you have no idea about it, you think they're angels, but they're literally the devils. And our community, the Indigenous community, have been talking about the human trafficking and such that they're responsible for, that there's never been accountability on at all. And every year, the Office of the Child Advocate here in Alberta puts out a new report talking about this one focused a lot more on the opioid crisis, but like, all the unaddressed issues that happen in this industry. When I ran provincially, like I have a multitude of reports. There's one that comes
mhm,
out every year that explains all of the things wrong, that need recommendations that are never put forward and never implemented, and nobody cares because
yeah.
they just think everything is swimmingly. And meanwhile, Indigenous kids are dying in the system, and everybody's okay with it because the sooner we can get rid of that Indigenous population and steal this land and feel good about it, the better. So, that's just where we're at.
And it frustrates me to no end because I find the more I read, the more I learn. Since 2016, I've just immersed myself in my special interests. I will to stereotypic autism. Special interest is disability justice and human rights. They're so intersected.
Sure.
So I've read so much about all of this stuff, and podcasts and talk to people. Um, is that where was I going? Um, that your one decision as a social worker um, affects the family, and I just like gatekeeping. Um, my family had issues with my sister and the feds. When I was in grade 6, I thought it was the provincial government, but it was the federal government. She wasn't disabled enough for them because they were receiving the disability tax credit, and my parents had to pay them back, or else they go to court. Yada yada yada. So my parents paid them back. Got 3 different doctors to say my sister was disabled enough, and the federal government paid them back with interest. But like she's straightforward PDD, straightforward H. So she like her IQ is 48. So like I only know this because I seen her capacity assessment when I moved. That's why it's in my head. So like she's like it's not going to get better, but yet she wasn't disabled enough in the 90s.
Hmm.
So it's very frustrating. And how many people? How many like if we? I could go on. It's just so frustrating, and I see disabilities with racialized individuals, their fight is almost the same but different, but fighting for the same causes.
Yeah. But with the barriers of, racism and that bias. And like I just got my vaccine shot, my third one. And the both times I had to see a white nurse, both times it was grilling and grilling and grilling. And I
Mhm.
finally said to the lady, do you need to see my First Nations like Indian Act card? Would that help you feel better? And she was like, oh no, no, no. But the point is that when there's white people, you have to justify your
Mhm.
existence. And that's gross. Like, do your job or don't. Be like, if you
Yeah,
really just hate natives and you don't want to give us shots, then don't do it. Don't do your job. I'd
yeah,
rather have a shortage than a racist nurse expecting me to explain why it is I need a COVID-19 shot and I get it before somebody else in her life that she thinks should probably get it before me. So, I'm so tired of this conversation, and I'm tired of the bias in the health community, and I'm tired of voters electing these politicians that allow the status quo to continue. So, do you have any ideas what we could do as just regular people to advocate better for
I
folks
think
with disabilities?
keep fighting.
Sure.
You have to speak up. Uh, but speaking up and speaking over is two different things. Like writing to your MLA, writing to your politician in city council, because disability and I would even argue any racialized issue is in every political issue.
Yeah.
It touches everything.
Sure.
So it's not being quiet. It's not. It's standing up. And I talked to I didn't talk to any mayor candidates, but I talked to the CBE trustees. I talked to all. Well, I didn't talk to the one that won in my ward, but I'm in a very conservative ward. I didn't know that when I moved in here. Uh, but I talked to the progressive ones, and yeah, it's just talking to them because it's not that they have to talk to you, but they will if you approach them.
Hmm.
And it's talking to people. It's getting to know people that are in your corner. I'm very open in that I listen to everyone and listen to their point of views. I don't try to influence other people's views because that's their views. I give you my view, and I may be wrong. That's why I listen to everybody because hey, I the more I know, the less I don't know. So I keep
Same.
learning.
Yeah.
So I'm open to anything. I like anything I've said today. I could be completely wrong in anything. I don't know, and
Yeah.
I just need to be informed. And I'll keep going because I don't want to stop. My thing is I have to have purpose in my life. My job is not about my money. It's about helping. I'm on like disability stuff so that I'm trying to change policies, and it's doing something more than just going to work and getting a paycheck. If you're going to work and getting a paycheck because that's what you have to do, that's fine. But in your other like in your spare time, volunteer or write a letter, write a petition, sign a petition. Um, I'm trying to network with more disability grassroots organizers because I don't know if I want to hitch myself to an organization because they may have problematic things that I don't agree with right now.
Right. I know it's hard. I want to give solutions, but at the same time, in a lot of ways, I see myself as like a recovering diversity committee member because the other part I find is that you can give the same recommendations over and over, and it just goes in one ear and out the other, and the policies never change. And I know a lot of folks are very excited about our new mayor, and unfortunately, I had 4 years of like silence with her, and a lot of the other counselors for that matter, and then worse when the whole anti-racism hearings came out, and they were so shocked and surprised. I knew at that moment I had completely wasted any email, any letter, any
Mhm.
conversation I had with the so-called progressives of the city council because it just went in one ear and out the other.
Yeah.
And I've seen it since
Mhm.
I started to become an activist, and I would say that was probably before Occupy. um, it's just seeing this constant belittling of the issue. And it was actually so prior to the Republicans kind of infiltrating the whole truther movement. This was the place that we were having these conversations about these hidden like truths that nobody wants to discuss. And this was long before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but it was addressed in the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People, again
Mhm.
ignored by the majority, right?
Yeah.
So it's so frustrating to it's like you can have your list and you can give them and give them. I mean, I was just having a conversation this morning with some journalist from Toronto, and he's like, well, do you have any recommendations? I'm like, have you listened to a single podcast? Because the podcast alone has the resources, right?
Mhm.
So, and let alone resources that aren't on my peripheral that I'm not always giving every time. And maybe that's a question I have for you is what are some of the resources that should be more on the minds of the average Joe in or Jane in Alberta?
I think because I get really frustrated with the average Joe and Jane is
Mm.
because they think like especially the anti-vaxxers right now are just irritating me so much.
Yeah.
But it's like the critical thinking. If they could just do some critical thinking and actually just don't go along with the masses. Because my thought is, if you're for human rights, if you're for one human rights, you can't pick and choose your human rights. Either you're for them or you're against them. But to pick and choose your human rights, why are you doing that? Maybe have critical self-reflection.
Oh,
Um,
honestly, that's been my biggest piss off about these anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers. They are not around for women's reproductive rights. They're not around for the disability rights. They weren't around for cannabis legalization. They're not around for the opioid crisis. They weren't around for midwifery. They're just not around unless it's them only,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it's so frustrating because there's a lot of health advocacy to be advocating for,
Hmm.
and they're fighting for a really selfish point of view in the bigger
Exactly.
picture, really. So
Yeah, it's looking at the bigger picture. I've always taught of look at, well, the way I was raised was look at other people
mhm,
and um, kind of put other people first.
yeah.
And part of being autistic, I can't lie, and I'm very empathetic. I will when lying, I will not lie, but I will miss by omission. But if you ask me a direct question, I cannot lie. Uh, but um, so it is just like white people need to do more. They need to understand that they're settlers. That they need to understand they're settlers. They need to understand that this what white supremacy is and the difference between white white national is and white supremacy is.
Mhm.
Supremacist and supremacy. They need to understand that our system and like colonialism is. They need to our education system needs to stop regurgitating and dumping just. Do we need to know the facts of 1812? No. The War of 1812? No. Sure, we need some facts of World War II. Yes. But we need to know why it happened so it doesn't happen again.
Sure.
So we need to. Not everybody needs to go to post-secondary to learn critical thinking because we still need trades. We still need this. So K to 12 needs to teach critical thinking because I think the anti-vaccine movement has shown that there's lack of critical thinking.
Well, and I would argue in Alberta, we have to do it in grade 9 because in grade 10, kids can just go straight into the trades, and a lot do, and they work at Fort McMurray and they never get there.
Yeah,
And that's okay because they're just a warm body that the oil industry can absolutely exploit and will until they either, hurt themselves, get out by themselves in some capacity. Like we need to do it in grade 9 because in
yeah.
Alberta you don't have to have your high school diploma in order to work around here.
So K to 9, we need to do some critical thinking
Yep.
because yeah, you're right. We don't need post-second like it doesn't. We can't wait till post-secondary anymore. We
Nope.
need K to 9. You're right. We need critical thinking skills.
Yep. Yep. And I don't know where that I was born and raised here. I did K to 12 here. I don't understand how my own peers are so oblivious to this bigger conversation about health freedom. No idea. I remember when Sean Buckley was focusing on it for there were a couple of cases that I just was like watching religiously, wondering what was going to happen, and
Mhm.
the white people get away than more than anybody else, and it's just if racialized people never get media, they never get the lawyer, they never get there, so then they never get fought for. So they then have to go into the criminal system with the assumption that they're negligent parent in comparison to the white parent who worked really hard for health freedom. I don't know, man. I I also don't know what it's like to, you know, have a conviction that you're unwilling to ever falter on when it comes to health freedom because, I didn't vaccinate my daughter right away, and we delayed, and that bigger picture was, at a certain point when they can start advocating for themselves and say my head hurts and things like that, and you try to give them choices, and but at the same time, like, it was really obvious to my daughter, she didn't hesitate with this COVID-19, that this
Mhm.
was, a global pandemic. It was disproportionately affecting Indigenous people. It was disproportionately, um, you know, not just killing people, but creating people with long-term disabilities. And and like I said to her alone, so look at the cost of a vaccine. Look at the cost of an ICU stay. Like if you can be over here, why wouldn't you? Like as a so-called, personal responsibility, personal freedoms, caring about your community for no other reason. If all you give a shit about, like, and I say this because I know our demographic is in Alberta, and the empathy and compassion is not there. They don't give a shit. All they care about is money, 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 money. And
Mhm.
as a result, okay, if your only argument is money, you know, vaccine, $20,000 a night in a hospital. Not, and if you're in ICU, I think it's even more. So, like, just if all you care about is money, you don't care about humans, you don't care about your neighbor, you don't care about community. All you care about is your money, money, money. Get the fucking vaccine, man. I can't. I can't. I'm. I understand where they're coming from because I talk about health freedom and every other aspect, but this is one of those things. It's like, well, isn't the responsible choice to possibly, like, I got my shot on Friday. Right now I have some inflammation, a little cloudy thinking. My arm hurts really bad, but that's nothing in the comparison of trauma of going to ICU. That's nothing compared to the cost of ICU. Like, I can't wrap my head around their stupid arguments.
And if they're saying they're human rights, I think I've done a lot of human rights courses that their one right does not trump the right of the common good.
Well,
Their yeah,
why can't I give birth without trauma?
exactly.
Like, you legitimately care about human rights. Then
Hmm.
why are you not advocating for the one basic thing we all do, and that's fucking give birth?
Yeah. Or the opposite. If women don't want to have a child, stop asking me and stop pressuring me to have a child.
Yep.
And it's just I get so frustrated because it's the common good. It's not about you. It's about the common good. And they I find that a lot of people are very selfish. Um, and that um, I could be selfish too. Everybody is, but when it comes to the common good, I want to do better, and I want my niece and nephew to do better. And like I yesterday, like I tried to. I know that I have a lot of privileges, so I try to voice my opinion, or not a voice. I try to when I'm at tables, I try to voice like why isn't this person here, or try to voice the unpopular opinion of certain like um, the disability, or why isn't this person here, or like the racialized person, like why, like I I represent a disability voice, but why isn't somebody else here not here?
Right. And
I
conversely, I know that you've enriched, like, the reconciliation action group and the book club, because you remind us at times
Yeah,
that this has to be kind of in place for folks. So, like, I hope you know how much your advocacy matters, no matter what circles you're in.
thank you. And I like I like to I uh, donate money, and I just um I to yesterday the one of the veterans is helping interpreters uh, from Kabul. So that was important to me because those interpreters fought by them by the side of our veteran or our army or our soldiers, and it was they put their lives on the risk at risk. So that was important to me to donate because there's nothing I can do for that besides donate some, because that's a lot. But it's there's just so much going on, and like yeah, I watched about the sheltered workshops in the states and how some there's legally they can pay people. I don't know if this is still happening in Canada. I can't remember. Um, that in the states they can pay people under the minimum wage, in sheltered workshops. They just have to apply, and they can meet people with disabilities as little as 22 cents an hour in the States. And I knew that you could do that in Canada when I was going to school, but I don't know if they've changed it. There's that made me think there's just so much to do. There's just so much work.
Yeah, there is. And you know what? Like, I think that's why it's important we talk, especially on, Indigenous Disability Month, but throughout, like, thank you for being a return guest to talk about these things.
Mhm.
But I think it's important that we continue keeping up the fight and,
Yeah,
seeing those intersectionalities and I don't know, there's so much to talk about, but at the
mhm.
same time, like you said, keep fighting, keep
Yeah,
moving forward, keep
yeah,
advocating.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it will make change. It's just it's slow change, but it's trying to keep people accountable. It's
Hmm.
holding people accountable that are
Hmm.
in power.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, well, that's all we can do, that's for sure. And hopefully we'll, continue to unpack all of this. I know for me, using ableist language is a huge issue that I still have to face because I'm an able-bodied, privileged person that needs to unpack that and like just quit doing it in some capacity. Um, Somebody was giving me a hard time. Well, first of all, somebody was saying I was two-faced, so they were insulting me. And so I was correcting their spelling, and other people use that as an example of my ableism, but it's
Mhm.
obviously not the same when it's coming from an evil place anyway, which
Yeah,
clearly that was. But that is an example of not being accommodating to other people's spelling. And I mean, in my case, half the time it's autocorrect problems, but whatever, I
yeah.
hate autocorrect in a lot of ways. So yeah, I rely on it in a lot of ways too. So
And, and it's just it's even people with disability have internalized ableism, so it's
sure.
calling their own selves out too.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's just it's always evolving.
yeah. Well, that's good. I'm glad. Anything else you want to discuss today?
Oh, we could go on forever, but I think we're good for today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shelley, for coming on. And of course, I welcome you to, help me in my um, exit as I know you listen, so I know you know it. So I appreciate that. And I encourage you to add in if you see something.
I
Um,
listen I
Go
listen to
ahead.
it every time so it gets in my head.
Nice, nice. It's funny, my husband, we've talked about me just pre-recording some of this, and I'm like, no, I want to say it because every time I do, like something that has happened in the week, that it's like, oh yeah, and this mofo or whatever I say.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
I'm proud that this podcast has given solutions and cultural safety and cultural first aid for all of them to create a safer place for Indigenous people of color, those with disabilities, and LGBTQ2 plus to speak. Thank you to authors Cheryl Ward, Alicia Fritkin, Chelsea Branch of heretohelp.bc.ca about their What is Indigenous Cultural Safety and Why I Should Care About It. I've said it so many times in my podcast, and I just like to highlight it here as part of your reconciliation work and settler understanding. Internalized racism, lateral violence. And we actually talked about internalized uh, disability issues here as well. All of this is a form of violence against marginalized folks experienced by the structure imposed on these lands. And it's important, if you don't know what I'm talking about, learn about that internalized hate because it needs to be addressed in order to move forward. So racialequitytools.org, What is Internalized Racism by Donna Bevins. But again, there are other types of internalized oppression that has to be unpacked. So no matter what avenue, like look into it. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee. If you see or experience racism, you can also text if you're in Alberta, act to end racism.ca, 587-507-3838 is the number you can text for that resource as well. Indigenous have been talking about issues, sharing our traumas and reports, commissions, and public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians and their policies and platforms. If they don't recognize marginalized people in their budget with Gender Equity Plus, if they're cutting violence prevention programs and services, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities. Know that your vote to that party, that person directly negatively impacts marginalized people. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports about child welfare reform, violence prevention, and now there's 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. Denying these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in the educational, health, and justice institutions, with multiple reports that say the same things. Demand change from election platforms, politicians. They don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, sexism. They literally have zero business running. It should be understood by all parties, politicians, community orgs, sports organizations. And a really great article I said out loud was Truth Before Truth, how non-Indigenous Canadians become allies. If you were to Google that, you would find so many new articles as well. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything we talked about today and want to talk, there's a First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they also have a text feature on their website of hopeforwellness.ca. If more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. That also is a 24/7 crisis line that's toll free. For non-Indigenous people, there are distress center lines that usually work in your area with 211, but also there is a number 833-456-4566. And if you're a 60 scooper here in Alberta, ssisa.ca. And if you look up hashtag survivor driven, that's what they work with. Another organization that I love is the Trevor Project. They have lots of peer support lines and lifelines for trans youth, LGBTQ2 plus youth, and their phone number is 1-866-844-7386, and they have tons of more stuff as well on their lifevoice.ca crisis support website. And the Kids Help Phone here is in Canada, 1-800-668-6868. Violence is an everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. So I started this podcast to speak freely without interruption, without tone police, without leadership shaming, without gaslighting questions, as many people don't want to hear my opinion, but sure want to tell me theirs, even though they know nothing about what it's like to be Indigenous, colonialism, constant surveillance of our people, our protests, our vigils, our rights, microaggressions, people dealing with internalized racism, and those who become gatekeepers and survive off the status quo. Then we have people who are so in their trauma that they stop people from doing the work and deplete personal resources. Internal and external racism is an everyday reality for Indigenous people. And that's why I started this podcast as a boundary to be heard, but also because we need Indigenous voices and representation, because we are not hearing it from, the mainstream media in any capacity. Thank you to my ancestors, my granny, my mom, and what strength looks like through your example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and roots and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her I'm a second generation. But that said, I highly recommend people do not identify as Native Calgarians, because if you're not Indigenous, that sounds racist. Anyway, thank you to my husband, Darcy, for producing and editing the show on top of being my husband, my childhood friend, the father of our child. He has supported me down my journey of the Red Road. He has witnessed decades of racism and sexism. And to our child, who we're blessed to learn from daily, I'm honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. And I hope one day my family, my daughter, will be proud of us trying to discuss these present day issues. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you to my previous donors for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc at gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. I also have a podcast channel that you can go and subscribe to, the YouTube channel. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts. And on social media, it's usually the pinned post. So I want to end by giving side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not tradish. And my beautiful cousin would respond, or you'd be in my dish. Thank you so much for listening.